Hello and welcome, everyone. It is a pleasure to have everybody joining in live. For anybody who is listening to this as a recording, appreciate you taking the time to dial in, listen. This is, to me, yet again, a very exciting topic. It's something that, as I mentioned before, it's something that popped up so many times when I was at Gartner back in December. The joiner mover lever problem is something that was questionably a problem that a lot of customers are still trying to solve out there. They don't have the technology, they don't have the architecture, uh, and this is a problem that is probably about 20 years old that they're trying to solve, and they're still trying to solve it. So, with that being said, I thought I would, along with my good friend Kyle Wright. Kyle, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Kyle Wright. I'm a professional service engineer here at ABAC, and I'm excited for to talk about this joiner mover lever problem as well.
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah. So what we thought we would do is kind of walk through, talk about what exactly is the joiner mover lever problem. What is this problem customers and corporations across the world? What are they trying to solve? What does it look like? How does it manifest itself? How does it present itself with the applications that they've got currently? And then we're going to flip the script. We're going to talk about just how easy this problem actually is to solve. Uh, while we do that, uh, it's always great to talk about the solution, but we're also going to show the solution. To which Kyle is getting his demo up and running. This wouldn't be live if we didn't have problems with the demo environment shortly before, but that's what makes it more fun. So, all that being said, let's jump right in. The joiner mover lever problem, it is exactly the way it sounds. You've got somebody who is just coming on board, a new employee. When that new employee comes on board, you need to make sure that they have the right level of access to handle the information that they need to do their job. But once they've joined the company, that they don't typically stagnate. They don't just join and that's it. Eventually, there's times where people move from one department to another. There's promotions, and if not, even if somebody doesn't move within the organization, this isn't our parents' generation. There are also people who quite often leave the organization. And when that happens, we want to again make sure that as soon as they leave, or the day that they leave, they no longer have access to information that could be sensitive in nature. So what does all that look like? I want to start with the joiner problem. And when it comes to the joiner problem, I kind of want to step you through the process that typically happens. So as you'd imagine, there's, the hiring process goes well. Eventually that person that you've selected says, yes, they do want to join the company. At that point, usually they go through a process within IT where they add them as a user, whether that's through Active Directory, Entra ID, it doesn't really matter, but you're adding that person to the company. Now, the next step is that now you have to end up putting them or giving them access to the software that they need to do their job. And this is where it gets really complicated because one, more often than not, people need access to more than one software. It's a handful of software. It's dozens of software it can be. And usually what ends up happening there is that you take a gold standard user, somebody who is, this is the person that has all the roles that you'd end up assigning to them, like they're in the Department of Engineers. They are based in the US. Uh, their security clearance is level 1. Uh, all of the different attributes that make up who they are typically end up getting added as roles. But these roles are often just simply cloned from that master user. And what ends up happening is that usually that person who comes on board is typically inheriting more access than what they actually need in order to do their job. Not only that, like I said before, it's something that has to happen on every single application that they touch. So if there's, let's just say, a dozen applications that this user has to work with, all of a sudden there has to be somebody who has to interact with every single one of those applications in order to add them as a user. Unfortunately, what ends up happening there quite often is you end up with a situation of human error getting involved. One thing I didn't mention, for anybody who does have questions, feel free to put it in the chat. We will try to get through them as we go. Otherwise, I will address them at the end of the presentation. Now, once we understand what the problem is, let's take a look at how ABAC, and not just simply axiomatics, but how attribute-based access controls works. The way it would happen is typically in the same sense. You have that new user coming on board, and the first step is that IT adds all the data points about that user into Active Directory or Entra ID, and those data points are what make up who the user is. So as an example, we would end up with the fact that, sure, it's John Doe and he's based in the US, but more than that, their department is engineering. Their job title would be software engineer. Their location is they work in office, they don't work remotely. And their employee status, obviously in this case, they are an active employee. What that does, that makes up not just every data point about the user, but then rather than having to go against building out roles for each and every one of these users, we're able to pull those attributes as the user tries to access information. So the difference would be that instead of having to now provision that user based on their attributes, they would already have access to information based on the rules or the policies that have been defined already. So in this case, we already have rules or policies based on our existing users that says if the user's department matches the department that they're required for the resource, they'll have access. If your job title is listed as one of the roles allowed to access the resource, again, you'll be granted access, and so on. But with all that being said, I think, Kyle, it probably makes more sense to just jump right in. Let's take a look at a demo if your environment's up and running. Oh, Kyle, you're on mute.
Sure, yeah, let's take a look at that. Is there anything I need to do, Emmy, or are you able to?
You should be.
I'm going to share my screen.
Present.
Okay. Let's see here. Okay. You guys see my screen?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, great. Okay, so as a demo for if a user was to join a company, such as in this instance, we have a healthcare company demo app. So we have a user here, Laura, and Laura just got hired to work in the claims division of this insurance company. So right now, when we authenticate into the application, we don't see any options for Laura because her attributes aren't set yet because she just joined the company. Now, when we go to our LDAP connection, and this could be any data source of any kind, it could be SQL connection, an Active Directory, Azure connection of some sort. we can just go in and add our values for Laura's persona. And now if we just give her her job title and now we have all these other attributes as well, and as many attributes as you can use as many attributes as you want to give a more fine-grained approach to authorization. But when we reload, we can see we have now options for Laura to go through.
So what we're basically looking at here is a situation where if you were to go look at where these attributes are stored, in our case, so Laura would have been added to the company directory. She would have had access to the different, she would have been an employee, obviously. But what hadn't happened is that she hadn't been activated. Her status wouldn't have been an active user at this point. So Kyle behind the scenes basically just made her an official insurance agent. As soon as that happened, everything that Laura is trying to access within this application all of a sudden becomes live real-time information that she can now access. What is really amazing about what we just saw, and it's almost anticlimactic because it's just so easy, is the idea that this is happening not just, again, in the one application that we're looking at. It would happen for every application that Laura needs access to. It is instant, it's available, it's happening in real time, and it removes all of that potential human error from the situation. Kyle, anything else you wanted to dive into there?
I think you described it perfectly.
Beautiful. All right. In that case, in my opinion, the joiner is sort of the easy one. Like it's the one that makes the most sense. It happens, like I said, for every employee, but the one that gets really a whole heck of a lot more exciting is if we go back to the presentation, and what I'll do is start moving into the next step. The mover. The mover is the one that happens quite frequently. Like I said before, it's the situation where you've got a promotion. You're switching from one department to another. It is the one that is most problematic, though. And the reason why it becomes problematic is, like I said before, typically the old world approach of access is that you are assigned specific roles for what you're trying to access. Like I said, you're based in the U.S. You're, beyond just the U.S. You're working within the Northwest, whatever it might be. You're in the Department of Software Engineering, and so on and so on. But what happens when you move? So, as an example, if you move from marketing over to sales, typically what ends up happening is that in order to make that move happen, IT comes in and they now assign you the role of sales, which grants you access to all the information that would happen within sales. And for companies that are really trying to get fine-grained access controls with RBAC, it wouldn't just be you're in sales. There would typically be distinct roles for everything that they're trying to make fine-grained. So you're in sales, that's one role. You're within the mid-market, that's another role. You have the Pacific Northwest, that's another role. But essentially, it is all of these roles that are trying to make up what you have access to at this point. But the problem is, because roles are so fragile and sensitive, most organizations don't go back and actually remove roles that you should no longer have access to. So going back to the scenario that I just walked us through, if you were a user going from marketing to sales, you'd end up with the new sales roles, but you wouldn't end up with the marketing roles being removed. And what would that end up leading to is you end up with users, again, who have more access to information the longer that they stay within an organization. One of my favorite quotes from a customer who prefers not to be named is, employees who had been with the company for more than 5 years had an average of 85 roles assigned to them. Now that would have been obviously with the old role-based access control model versus with Axiomatic, but it just shows how much access a user would have the longer that they stay with the company. So how do we go about fixing that problem? Well, again, everything is all managed at the attribute layer. So in our case, kind of following on the example that we were looking at before, so that new software engineer came on board. Well, maybe that software engineer is actually moving over to the QA team. So what that means is, well, they should start losing access to some of the software engineering information. They might still need access to the design docs, the user stories, but they probably don't need access to the code, which means they also need access to any of the QA tools. So as soon as that happens, in this case, rather than their department being engineering at this point, now they're within the QA department. Their job title has switched from software engineer over to a QA analyst. They're actually now a remote employee rather than an on-site employee, but of course they're still an active employee. Again, with ABAC, all of the policies, all of the rules are already defined. We've already said that if you're within the department that you're trying to access information from, you're going to have access as long as your role and employee status are aligned. So what's going to end up happening is now, as John Doe here tries to access information as a QA analyst, he'll no longer have access to any of the software engineering information, but he'll be updated to just information within the QA department. Kyle, before we jump into a demo, anything you'd like to add to this?
As you can see, we're just using only attributes to define things that would rather be used as roles, just as Matt explained. But when we look at the demo, we can see that in real time. So let's switch over to the demo.
Love it.
So okay, so now we are still logged in as Laura, and one of Laura's primary jobs is looking at claims. So when we go to the claim widget right here, we can see right away it's loaded with all the insurance information for the Chattanooga region in Tennessee. That's the region that Laura is assigned to. But going with the mover problem, let's say Laura got moved to another busier region. Chattanooga is being taken care of by the other insurance agents, but she is needed in the Memphis region. So we would have to go into our LDAP connection or any source of truth, which we can use to define attributes. We can just change Laura's location here. And before, we would have to use all sorts of different roles. We would have to have a Chattanooga role, a Memphis role, a Knoxville role, all these different roles to give access to specific information. But now we can just change what locale Laura is looking at. And when we just refresh the page, in real time, we can see all the information changed to the Memphis region. And like we said in the previous example with the joiner problem with the mover, this is also applied across all applications that are connected to Axiomatics.
I think, so one of, again, the simplicity of the demo really speaks to the simplicity of the answer. Rather than roles, use the information that you've already got. These are already data points that you've got stored within your data sources. In our case, it's JExplorer. In your case, it might be SailPoint, it might be Active Directory, it might be a database. You're already storing the information. Don't duplicate it with roles is kind of the theme of this conversation. But what I love about the mover situation is that it handles so many different use cases so elegantly. So we won't go through this as a demo, but let's just say that our colleague here, Laura, she isn't just being moved over from Chattanooga to Memphis. Maybe she's being promoted to branch manager, which means that instead of just having location as Memphis or Chattanooga, maybe she's got both of them. And in that case, she'll actually be able to see all the data for both regions. Or similarly, let's say that there's a break glass scenario. So as an example, maybe Laura is working in Memphis, but there's a catastrophic event happening in Chattanooga that needs additional support. We don't normally want people in Memphis working for Chattanooga, but what we can do is have a break glass scenario where, based on that event, now everybody in Memphis would have access to Chattanooga to support that increased load. But it's the ability to do all of that so quickly by just simply managing the attributes for your users instead of having to just continually push different roles on your users. All right, Kyle, any other demos that you wanted to go through in this case?
In this case, I think we should just go on to the lever problem.
All right, sounds great. In that case, finally, as you can imagine, like I said, when an employee joins, it's just a matter of time before they leave. Maybe they're lucky and they make it all the way to retirement, who knows? But eventually, we need to make sure that they no longer have access to the information that they currently have. And this one I find a very, very shocking problem. So as a user does leave the organization, they put in their 2 weeks, their 1 month, their 3 months, whatever it might be, but there is that eventual cutoff date. And while I had always thought that cutoff date would be on that date, it is shockingly not. So what I mean by that is, how do we make sure that user loses all access to information after a particular date? Well, in most cases, it doesn't actually happen. As an experiment for anybody listening in, either live or to the recording, I would ask you to go back to any companies that you used to work for. Try to log into any of the systems that you might have had access to. And you might be shocked to find out that you actually still maintain access, not just days and weeks later, but months and years after you've left the organization. It is fairly common and can lead to a fairly problematic situation, especially if that user has access to highly sensitive information. So how do we save the day, or how do we manage that with attribute-based access controls? Well, just like everything else, it's all managed through attributes. Like I said, this is very much the theme of the day, where attributes where they're all managed in one central location, are able to help reduce that risk and make it easier for the joiner mover, and in this case, the leaver situation. So what we've got in this case is, again, we've got a user who's now leaving the organization. We may not want to completely remove them from the system. We might want to keep them as part of our Active Directory in case they ever come back. But we want to make sure that as of today, they no longer have access to information. So in this case, what we would end up doing is updating our attributes so that they are marked as no longer that active employee. And in that case, what it would end up doing is they might still have authentication access to applications, but they would no longer have authorization to access anything within the application. So Kyle, I will hand it back over to you for a final demo.
All right. Okay, so we are back in the demo environment, and we're still with Laura here. So Laura, it's her last day. She's doing everything, working with her claims in the Memphis region, making sure she, working to the last minute. She gave her 2 weeks notice, and it's her last day. Now, when we go to deprovision Laura from our application, all we have to do is update the attributes that are associated with giving her access to the things inside the application. So we don't have to actually delete everything from our sources of truth, like in our example, JExplorer. We can keep everything in there just to have a record of what Laura had access to, what things where she was located, all that stuff. But we want to remove any attributes that are associated with giving her access throughout the application. So here, what I just did was I just removed her title as an insurance agent and just left it blank. You could even give her a new title as X insurance agent or anything. All of these things are designed in policy. So anything you want to, it's up to you as to how you want your values to look. But now, since I removed that from policy, when we go back to the home screen, we can see we now don't have any access to do anything inside the demo portal. We're still able to authenticate into the demo portal, but once we're in, we have no access to do anything, look at any user information. It's all deprovisioned from her. And it's also all deprovisioned from any other application throughout the organization. So anything looking at our LDAP JExplorer connection for attributes, now Laura is not able to do any actions in any of those other applications as well.
Yeah. And what I like about this is just the simplicity here. All we did was we just removed one data point about who Laura is. We're not having to go into every single application. We're not having to completely decommission Laura. And in fact, let's go ahead and say, Laura was one of those great employees. It was really hard to lose her. So much so that 6 months later, when she reaches out and says, I really enjoyed my time, I'd like to come back. If we were to go back into JExplorer and give her old role back of an insurance agent, as soon as we do that, as soon as Laura goes back in and refreshes the page, instantly, without question, the rules still apply, her access applies, and she has access to everything that she would based on all of her attributes. Again, don't make the change in every application. Don't assign roles that have already been assigned as attributes because they become out of date and out of alignment. take the attributes from where they already exist, use that in order to make the right decision at the right time. All right. So, kind of finishing off. Yes, everybody can see my screen. So, a couple just quick final notes before we jump off. As I mentioned before, one of the biggest problems with the role-based approach is something called role explosion. As I mentioned before, one of our customers mentioned the fact that 85 employees that have been with the company for more than 5 years typically have on average 85 or more roles. That is absolutely incredible. What makes it even more incredible is that they have more roles than they have employees. And what makes that more incredible is when you think about how complex those roles have to become in order to give you that fine-grained access control. And in order to get to that fine-grained access control with roles, it does lead to this role explosion. And that becomes so complicated that it becomes almost impossible for organizations to manage. So, aside from what we've already talked about, if we look at the legacy approach with an RBAC-based model, it really comes down to these 3 items. It's costly. It becomes very difficult to manage. It is very slow to manage, and the policies aren't so much policies, but you have to react based on changes as they happen. You're not able to just simply update the attributes and move on. Whereas with ABAC, and this is my shameless plug for Axiomatics, but the ABAC on its own is great. But with Axiomatics, what we're able to do is we're now able to start to centralize your policies. And what I mean by centralized policies is rather than every application having its own set of policies, own set of rules, own set of roles, you're able to completely centralize that set of policies so that as users join different applications, join the team, move within the team, or leave, you're able to manage that all from not just centralized rules, but from centralized attributes. With that comes the consistency. So what that means is that if I have a certain level of access within one application based on who I am, I shouldn't have more or less access to other applications. A really good example of this is actually another company that we were working with. They had 2 application APIs based on one application. And depending on which API you are accessing the information from, their users were actually getting different results. So for them, just being able to centralize and set up consistent policies across all of the applications was a huge win for them. And last but not least, it obviously comes down to security and zero trust without impacting the end user. So what I mean by that is all of a sudden, rather than a role-based access where it is 100% binary, it is you have access, you don't have access, whether or not you should have access or not. With Axiomatics, we move towards that zero trust model, which is never trust, always verify. Which means every single time that the user tries to access information, we're verifying that at this point in time, you should have access to information, not did you have access to the information. Which makes it a whole heck of a lot more valuable for customers. If you were to think back to the demo that Kyle put on, every time that those attributes were updated, the user experience behind the scenes was updated. That is a perfect example of that zero trust mentality. So, this was the joiner mover lever problem in 35 minutes. If you're curious, you want to find out more, obviously the axiomatics.com website has more information. If you'd like to see a demo and be able to ask more relevant questions as we go, it's pretty quick and easy, axiomatics.com/demo. But at the end of the day, appreciate your time, appreciate you coming in to listen. If you agree, don't agree, I am always happy to have the conversation. So feel free to reach out and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.